Hello guys, I'm orbital, your Welsh engineer, and welcome to the development program of the Space Shuttle. Yeah, I was going to do a tutorial of this, but I found out that doing a space shuttle is really hard, and I remembered I used single engine on my space shuttle on the last, not tutorial, but build. So here we go. For one thing, you have to make sure that everything is balanced from lift, thrust to weight ratio, obviously, otherwise it won't get into space, and the weight distribution, which is more critical than I thought. And I'm developing this space shuttle to take an orange tank into space, you can see. Well, probably what you first notice is that I put a fuel tank at the front, not an RCS tank or anything else. I could put a smaller tank at the front in hindsight, but I think that is best because I can pump the fuel back and forth between the tank that we're going to add on the back. Oh yes, and don't forget add struts on the orange tank if you do add an orange tank to your development of a space shuttle. And there you go, there's the other tank. Okay, this is the hardest part. This is the part I had the most difficulty with. And that is the engines on the rear of the shuttle. Now, when I first done the shuttle, I don't think I had these vectoring engines available. And they're awesome engines because they give you 10 degrees of vectoring, which is awesome because that allows you to get the center of lift. As I'm shown by here, I've got the engine at an angle, and I'm mentioning here, I did this post-commentary by the way, I was going to do this live, but what I decided to do is try to develop the space shuttle so that the three engines are thrusting directly at the center of mass, and that is much more helpful when you're in space, once we've jettisoned that big tank. And for looks, I added these small radial thud engines for looks, because normally the shuttle uses them to finally get into orbit. Also, I decided to go against using the spaceplane tail fin. I know it's meant for the space shuttle, but I decided to go for this aerospace tail fin. It looked much cooler, and yeah, that's the only reason I've got for picking that. Also, don't forget to add the wheels. Normally, what I like to do when I'm doing a plane, I like to add all the weight up onto it. That includes the engines, the wheels, everything, fuel, whatnot. But then I realised that I'm going to have to add some wheels to the wings. And, oh yeah, they're pointing down slightly. No, what you want to do, what I decided to do anyway in this, is have the wings pointing upwards slightly. That should give it some stability when it's coming in for landing. Well, I hope. We'll find out. And now we can add the wheels onto the wings. A good rule of thumb is make sure that the wings are forward from the rear ailerons, which are the control surfaces on the back of the wings. Luckily, we're playing them on the wings. That means they're definitely going to be in front of the ailerons. Right, next thing to do is add the big S wing strake, that's called? Yes, this is strake. I didn't realise what it was called until now. And then what I like to do is add another one onto the wing itself, just rotated it around. So then you can place it as such. That way, that gives you that sort of like slight curve. I like the angle curve. I don't know why. It looks much cooler than that of the space shuttle where it had a gradual curve out to the outer wings. Now, I know NASA probably calculated that out. And, through software or, development. I don't think it was NASA, in fact, who designed the space shuttle, to come to think of it. I haven't done my research on this, so I have to claim my ignorance. Okay, some big note here, because once you put the ailerons on the back, don't forget to use the big ailerons. You've got two to choose from, one for the outer versions, and you can line up the other one, which is the big aileron S2, is it S2? Big S aileron 2, version 2. Now you see, because we've got the wings at an angle, the ailerons decide to go straight. How dare they go straight? But luckily with the tweak tools we can get them at an angle. However, just make sure they're lined up. That's just more for my OCD than anything. Because if I see any of your shuttles without that, yes, I will complain. Okay, with that almost done. Yeah, no, I couldn't stick with it. I had to rotate it slightly. I know it was only a small rotation. There you go, I'm happy. Okay. So this shuttle should be worthy of taking off. However, first thing, you have to get the center of lift behind the center of mass. Now let's take the orange tank out because this is going to be Or what I really should say, this is going to be set up for after we deorbit. But first things first, I almost forgot to add advanced SAS, because all we have is the little tiny wings on this, but a normal plane would have larger wings. Now, just making sure that we can still fit the large orange tank after adding batteries and other stuff. However, deciding that it may not be enough room, what I decided to do is, let's get the orange tank out there first, is to clip the advanced SAS back a bit further. That way we'll have a bit more payload to actually add stuff to it. And if you notice, when I'm pulling it back a bit, it seems to go down slightly, and we don't want that because it offsets the center of mass a bit further down. And we're offset enough as it is with the engines. So let's add the solar panels, make sure everything's fitted correctly. Now let's prepare this for its maiden flight. So first off, let's empty some of the fuel at the front tanks and the rear tank, balance them out. I decide, yeah, that's about what we'll end up probably after an orbit. Now what we'll do is we'll move the center of lift, so it's a bit forward. And what we're looking for is perhaps, in fact, at this point, I wasn't sure of the distance. So we want the center of lift behind the center of mass. Now I decide that's about good. They're almost equal. They're almost touching if they were closer together. And if I add extra fuel to the front, because we want to see what we have at different ratios of fuel, it's about the same. The center of mass is a bit further forward. So I think this is ready to go launch and test it out. But the first time I do launch this and test it, I forget to take the orange tank out of the shuttle. Anyway, let's go ahead, take this onto the launch pad. We've got Oprid and T-Wake Kerman. I think I used them on live stream. Alright, launching the shuttle. This is pretty good, actually. It's nice and stable on takeoff. Got some aerodynamic drag. You can see the effects. Okay, using more fuel than I planned to. What I should have done was taken this up with a rocket or a plane or something, I don't know. But anyway, this is a good test. Because we have emptied more fuel, that means we can test the aerodynamics. There's me trying to turn it. I think I did a bit too much of a sharp turn. And then trying to recover this, it would only go backwards. I could not flip it around. I could have pumped the fuel to the front, perhaps. Getting the center of mass forward a bit, but that's besides the point. I want the fuel to be balanced on both sides. So yeah, what we're gonna have to do is move the center of lift. Let's empty some of the fuel to the configuration we had it at during the test and adjust the center of lift. Now I've gone on this idea that the center of lift should be the same size as that center of mass ball, but further back. And then when we add the extra fuel in it, that's not too bad. I reckon that might be flyable. So let's give it another go. And you can hear from the music, this is going to be a success. Or is it? You'll have to watch to find out. Okay, so the standard test is point at 30 degrees, upwards, boost until you're about 5 kilometers up, turn round slowly, using the engine to turn slowly because it makes much more sense and you don't lose so much speed, and come down and make sure that your speed does not go anywhere under 100 meters per second, because under 80 meters per second you go into a stall speed, so keeping it over 100 is cool. Yeah, it's cool. And here we are, coming in for landing. Obviously now we're dropping further down, and when we come close to the ground, do your quick lift up, and hey presto, you've bled up enough speed to come for your landing. Make sure the landing legs on the rear are hitting the ground first. Okay, that is done. Now for the major part, the hardest part of building a space shuttle. And that is getting it into space. Okay, so the problem is that once you add the large tanks on the back, yeah, that's going to clip the wheels. So I'm going to have to add a strut right here. That's a weird way of saying strut. However, you add a tank on the strut, making it sure it's lined up with the shuttle, and then you clip the tank closer to the shuttle into the strut. Now you can use that then to adjust the distance between that and the shuttle until you get the center of mass right for your center of thrust. That is the hardest part, getting the center of thrust pointing directly at the center of mass. If you don't have that, then your space shuttle won't go straight. Now the space shuttle ascent does not go straight as it is. Now if you notice, the center of thrust is not pointing at the center of mass at the moment. However, there is a trick. Now let's first set up these SRBs, because that's what the main shuttle uses. I decided that's what we use for this, at least at the beginning. Now this is a development program, so this is not going to be the final shuttle. Oh yes, and don't forget to add a fuel duct from your outer tank to your shuttle, otherwise you will be empty of fuel as you get into space. Now, yeah, I decided we'll have to add an extra tank just to get that little extra delta V for us to be able to get this tank into orbit. Now don't worry, it's not showing enough. We normally at 4, that way that we can set up the engines. Please. What you want to do is set up the SRBs with the decoupling, the thrusters and everything. Then you're going to copy the decoupler and attach it further around the tank. Now the reason I'm attaching it on this side of the tank, on the opposite side of the shuttle, is try to offset the center of thrust. And what I've got here is the thrust limiter on the engines, on the main shuttle engines, and if you adjust that, you can adjust the center of thrust. And in theory, you can adjust that until it points directly at the center of mass, even as fuel is draining and the center of mass is shifting. So it's just tweaking your thrust as you're launching into orbit. Now that is hard. Oh yes, an additional, also you just saw me setting up the tank so they drain from the bottommost fuel tank up to the forwardmost tank. That way the center of mass will go forward a bit further, making it easier for you to control using the shuttle engines, especially once we get rid of the SRBs. Anyway, let's go ahead and launch this. Test number 1. Launch, control throttle. Okay, you see, using the throttle to control the shuttle. However, at some point, we tilt over too much. Quick, abort, abort. Wheels out. Land, land. Oh no, the Kerbals are dead. Oh yeah. Back to the drawing board. Right, I decided, let's give this another go. Okay, thrust control. Oh, no, too far over. And no, I can't control it for some reason. We keep on rotating for some reason. We'll have to figure this out. More engineering is required after we slam into the ocean and revert. Okay, what I've decided is change the controls. Okay, we don't need roll controls on the wings, and we don't need the other controls on the winglet. I also disabled some of the gimbaling on the rocket engines. That does not work. Okay, another tweak. This time I let the vectoring engines only do pitch control. It seems to be working, but we're still getting that shimmy, that rotation. I cannot get rid of it. And we're tilting over too quickly. Okay, this time, let's try liquid fuel. Now, there's a plus side to liquid fuel boosters, and there is a minus side. The plus side is that they have a lot more delta V. Oh my, I think I forgot to adjust the center of thrust. The minus side to liquid fuel boosters is they don't have as much thrust-weight ratio as a solid rocket booster does. However, they do have more delta V, and it looks like the center of thrust is not lining up with the center of mass, so we're gonna have to redo this. Okay, quickly, Kerbals, we need you back. Increasing center, the thrust limiter on these engines. And come on, land. Oh, yes, we have landed. And watch this, mother of all. Space shuttle drifts. Awesome work, or drift. Okay, so I have to bite the bullet. Okay, so what we're going to do is angle the vectoring engines, but for that you need to attach one engine at a time. You cannot have them pointing on or connect them up with symmetry mode. Anyway, after setting up the center of lift with the center of mass, not center of lift, sorry, center of thrust. Center of lift is the wings, which causes all sorts of problems you can see by here. I think what we need is some more control. But doing test after test, trying to tweak the controls, seeing what happens if I disable this vectoring control on the vector engines or the winglets, or if I just enable all controls for everything. And we do get quite good results. Look at this, 25 kilometers up. We do get into space actually, we get a subdouble hop. However, I think I left the burning too late, it turned too much too quickly. But however, after losing control of the shuttle, I decided, let's take it back to shop. And let's add a little extra control. Okay, this time, I think one of the problems is that we have the SAS modules on the shuttle, and what they're doing is they're giving us control not around the center of mass, so that's causing the SAS to go haywire. So what we're going to have to do is add the extra control, not on the shuttle, but on the fuel tank itself. Now we've got no boosters on the fuel tank, and that's what making the space shuttle flying is really hard. And yes, I added 2 SAS modules on the bottom of the fuel tank. Now it's time for the maiden voyage of the shuttle. Now obviously I would not be showing you this if it did not work, however let's see how it performs. Okay, the one thing you have to do is, as soon as you launch, tilt over, so that the prograde vector is pointing about 10 degrees. Slowly turn it over, but don't use your WASD keys. So what I found is as soon as you touch the WASD keys, the things go haywire. So boost up, slowly letting the shuttle lead over on its own. And as soon as you get to, well, the height that you decouple the booster engines, then use the control keys until you get your apoapsis up to, well, 100 kilometers, I suppose. That's the standard. Then when you go for your orbit burn, correct using the maneuver node as best as possible the inclination that you need to change. Now if you look, I've got the forwardmost tank empty before the tank behind it, and that is to make sure the center of mass is more or less still in line with the center of thrust. Now as soon as that tank is empty, jettison it so you get the most of your bang for your buck, then change over to the orbital insertion engines. These take a little longer to finish the maneuver node. However, I think it's worth it because it's more pointing at the center of mass of the shuttle. If you use the shuttle engines, you'll flip out of control quite easily. Now do this until you get to your periapsis height up to about 70 kilometers. What you might find, as I found by here, is you have to point out radially to raise your periapsis until it's out of the atmosphere. After you've done that, you can quickly go to your apoapsis and then boost until you get into your periapsis up to a circular orbit. You also saw that I've added extra RCS tanks inside the shuttle, but let's release the orange tank. This shuttle is rated for one whole orange tank and is ready to build a space station. Let me know if you want me to build a space station with a space shuttle. It's going to be quite difficult and quite hard, as probably people saw in my live stream, especially if I keep on blowing at my space stations. Right now for the deorbit. This is the part I was worried about. I saw the trajectory just briefly that I set up. That was the second attempt, by the way. This first attempt I went too far over the ocean and I didn't have time to turn around and go backwards. Luckily, F5, before you do your deorbit burn, F5, so you can F9 and try again. Luckily on the second attempt it worked, and what I've done by here, you can see I've got the front fuel tank and the rear fuel tank on screen, and I've pumped the fuel forward to get the center of mass forward a bit. That's tried to make sure that the shuttle is stable enough. And yeah, you need to balance out the tanks when you're coming in for landing, which I should have known. But I tried to pump the fuel backwards. It worked once for some reason, didn't work the second time. So yeah, balance the tanks out when you're coming in for your landing. Okay, let's try and head for the runway. Oh, if we had this landing on the runway, if we had this landing at all, I think it would be awesome. I think at the speed we're coming down at, the angle, and the amount of speed going to bleed up by pulling up, it's going to be terrible. Now, trying to keep the roll of the space shuttle heading for the runway is quite hard. And yeah, with a bit more practice, I probably could do it. I'm not very good with space planes or planes in general, so yeah, and for some reason the wheels won't extend. Now I'm not sure if it's because deploy shielded was disabled, but when I enabled that and extended the wheels, it seemed to work. They worked before, but because of that shenanigans, I had to use the rocket engines, the shuttle engines, to get ourselves to shore. A couple of bursts. Oh, too close to the shore. And we have landed. Awesome stuff. My second space shuttle has worked. And this time using the vector engines. What the deuce? No! Obfrid has been attacked by the Kraken. Anyway guys, this is my space shuttle development program. I hope you enjoyed. Click the like button if you did. And yeah, I'm Orbiter. Trust me, I'm a space shuttle engineer.